If you only have 30 seconds to make the pitch to voters, what do you say? And how much does how you say it matter? With us now on that and whether we can already see the party's strategies from the ads they've put out so far. In the nation's capital, communications consultant Tim Hudak, who's also a doctoral candidate in political studies at Queen's University. And in London, Ontario, Laura Stevenson, professor of political science at Western University and co-director of the Consortium on Electoral Democracy. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
All right, so what does advertising play in the campaign strategies of Ontario's major political parties, Tim?
Well, it plays a pretty significant role in their strategy. It's mostly about building awareness. It's about framing messages. It's about identifying themselves to voters. It's about introducing themselves, in some cases, to voters who, at this stage of the game, really may not know even who the leaders of some of the parties are. That's a particular challenge, obviously, to the Liberals, but it is about all of those things. But primarily, it's about setting out a frame, letting people know what you think this campaign is about, and trying to drive messages home about what you're going to do about those important issues that you're claiming are the substance of the campaign.
Laura, I'll get your take on that as well. What role does advertising play in the campaign strategies of the major parties?
Sure. I mean, I agree with everything Tim said, but I would add one other thing, which is that it starts to tell voters that there's going to be an election. And while it is doing all the other work too, of course, of introducing the leaders and the platforms, one of the biggest things that happens during an election is that partisans are mobilized. And so all these political ads kind of remind people, hey, yeah, that's the party that I supported in the past. And in many ways, it gets them kind of in tune or tuned up, I guess, for the kind of fight, I'll say, between the teams that's going to be happening during the campaign.
All right, so let's chat about the campaign strategies of the major four parties. I'm hoping we can get sort of a high level, sort of what stands out to you, Tim, about the four major parties so far.
Well, we haven't seen a lot yet, and I'm afraid I'm going to reach back a little bit because they did start this a little bit before this week. They got into this last fall and started testing the waters around their messaging and making decisions about what it is that they want the electorate to see. But I'd say that the things that really stand out, obviously, that the Conservatives are engaged in very much a cheerleading exercise right now. I can't agree enough with what Laura is saying about a lot of this is about motivating people and getting them to come out and vote. Reminding them there's an election in process is exactly right. And the Conservatives have made clear that what they're going to do is cheerlead their folks right to the polls. Their ads are very much like something right out of a Nickelback video. There's the fist pumping, anthemic music. They might as well have called it Get Her Done instead of Get It Done. It's a very folksy approach to things. The NDP, they have had a few kicks at this with their current leader. And so their first order of a business appears to be taking on the record of the government, attacking Stephen Del Duca, trying to establish their own leader as the credible choice. You have no other alternatives. Let's go with the credible one this time. I think that's very much what they're trying to go for. And interestingly, I was surprised when they did test some ads out last fall, and it'll be interesting to see if they reprise this theme during the campaign. It was interesting that they recycled a phrase from the 2011 federal Conservative campaign, pasting Doug Ford and Stephen Del Duca with this "he didn't come back for you" business that was used against Michael Ignatieff by the Conservatives. It'll be interesting to see if the NDP continues that theme about, they're not here for you, they're here for power, they're here for other things. In terms of the Liberals, there's no question they're going to be attacking the Ford government's record, but they're also going to be introducing people to Stephen Del Duca, and that's very clear from the very first ad they dropped. They are concerned, and they should be, that people don't know who Stephen Del Duca is, what he stands for, which makes him a bit of a blank slate for the other parties to write their story on. And so they're working really hard early to try and create a narrative about Stephen Del Duca that they think will be appealing and positive. And as for the Greens, the Green Party obviously has a big hill to climb, but they're very much pushing the credibility buttons. They're talking about in their bits, in their 30-second pieces, they're talking about having a real plan for, a real plan for housing, a real plan for mental health, a real plan for climate change. So they're trying to push, again, that credibility button and show that they're about business, they're not about pomp and circumstance.
Laura, I'll get your take as well on that. Was there anything that stood out, whether from Tim's response there as well, but from the major parties as well?
The one thing I'm really noticing is the way the Conservatives are kind of going after the previous Liberal governments. And I think that's an interesting one to consider. I mean, the Liberals aren't the opposition right now, right? They are definitely, I'd say, weaker electorally than the NDP, although they're fighting hard against that. And the PCs are going back in time saying, remember, you didn't like that before, and we've cleaned up that mess. And so I think that's an interesting bit of positioning. It says a little bit about what the PCs think is their real opposition this time around. I mean, I think, obviously Tim gave a great rundown of the different campaigns, so I don't need to reiterate those. But what I'm really kind of watching is the way that the NDP is trying to position itself as like, here's the alternative to what you have, right? And then the Liberals are really hard trying to, I guess, come back up. So certainly, yes, introducing their leader, that's definitely a big thing. But it's hard sometimes to differentiate between the Liberals and the NDP in a lot of the things that they promise and a lot of the things that they say. And so, it's the starker contrast, I think, that comes between the PCs and the NDP, and that's what they're trying to kind of go forward on, right? Like, if not that, then us, and we're the ones who've been here. So it'll be interesting to watch whether these messages change and whether the PCs actually, turn and start to target the NDP a little bit more.
As much as we're talking about the message, I think a big part about advertising is the dollars as well. And Tim, when we talk about the advertisement dollars and getting the message out there, which party typically has the deeper pockets?
Well, typically the incumbent party does, and that's certainly true this time. The Conservatives have been fundraising like gangbusters even through the pandemic. But interestingly, this time the NDP has the biggest budget it's ever had. It has more money at the moment than the Liberals currently do. So it will put them in a really interesting position in this campaign to be able to spend a lot more than they're used to being able to spend on an ad buy.
Now, Laura, when it's election time, there's lots of rules. And that's the same thing when it comes to advertising as well. How do political advertising rules dictate what parties can and can't do, and sort of a timeline as well? Because these rules sort of date back well into 2021 or the later half of the year as well.
Well, the biggest thing is what happens now, right? Basically today, with the start of the campaign, that's when the real rules come into place. And, those are going to restrict kind of how much the government's, the various parties, it wouldn't be considered, I guess, the government in the same way anymore, will be able to spend for their campaigns. But of course, there's also rules about third parties, and that might matter even more. I mean, I think it's no secret that Ford has not done any, has not made any headway, let's say, with the same groups that disliked him before. So, the healthcare workers, the teachers, they're still feeling the same way towards him. But they, of course, aren't going to be able to do a ton because of the spending rules that are in place. And so we haven't even been seeing too much. I mean, right now, to be honest with you, the messages that I've been hearing kind of across the board are just, anything but Ford. We got to get rid of him. And this is going to cause all sorts of interesting issues, because what that requires with two parties who are somewhat viable, I guess, not so sure how to place them or to order them right now on the left, is that they'll require coordination to be able to beat the Conservatives. And the extent to which this can actually happen is not all that clear to me. So what's going to be really great to watch is kind of how other groups maybe start to put out endorsements, or whether there is going to continue to be an anything but conservative kind of attitude, or whether or not there will be some coordination behind a single competitor that will hopefully provide a stronger chance. I mean, everybody likes a real race, so to speak, right? And splitting votes to me is always an unfortunate outcome. So when we can really see both sides kind of coordinate rather than be hit, I guess, with the electoral system and party system restrictions and constraints, I think that makes for a much more dynamic race.
Social media has undoubtedly changed political marketing. And Tim, I'm curious to get your take. How is it factoring into the campaign strategies of Ontario's political parties now?
Deeply. I mean, social media has been around long enough now that it is just another medium for reaching potential voters. And it's a critical one because of the ability to personalize the messages, the ability to get to people with the things that really do matter to them, and to leverage conversation. I mean, more than anything, and there are lots of studies to back this up, that conversation among peers within households has a habit of driving votes. It has a habit of driving political engagement. It has a habit of bringing people out to vote ultimately. And social media is a way of driving those conversations, engaging people in the kinds of conversations you want them to have. And so we are already seeing, the parties, particularly the Conservatives, have been quite good at this for a number of years, driving conversations, leveraging the conversation that's already happening, and trying to get people excited about the issues that are in play. And ultimately, as Laura pointed out earlier, getting them out to vote. I mean, that's a big part of this, is keeping them motivated long enough to go out and cast a vote at the ballot box.
There was something that we saw in the Freedom Convoy in Ottawa. We saw underground social networking platforms gain traction. Tim, do you think there is an audience out there that political parties need to tap into that aren't on sort of, the TikToks, the Instagrams, the Twitters, or the Facebook? There is a whole other audience out there that hasn't been tapped into in terms of a political engagement perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Parties will go anywhere to find voters. And at the moment, I think it's very clear that they are, in fact, engaging people in those places now. As you said, during the convoy, it was very clear that politicians were paying attention to those background conversations. They were coming out and meeting with those people. They were engaging the conversations they wished to have. And I think that's a really important part of the new social media environment, which is that it is no longer quite so much everything being driven by sort of the air war of advertising campaigns. It's being driven as well by that ground level chatter through those various platforms. And I think that that's a really important element to pay attention to, because it is there that you're going to see where you're getting traction with people and about what issues you're getting traction on. And I think you'll see the parties, if they're smart, engaging with people on that level as well.
Now let's talk attack ads. Tim, you sort of mentioned the position that the Conservative parties are going on. It's a little bit different as well. Are they kind of going in an attack sort of direction, or is it sort of the idea that, it's all eyes on Doug Ford and time to vote?
No, the Conservatives absolutely have come out of the gate with an attack stance as well, and they're doing something really interesting, and quite frankly, my own research shows is probably not going to help them very much, but it'll be interesting to see what happens. They've gone with this kind of interesting hybrid where they're pumping up their own candidate at the same time that they're tearing down their opposition. My own research, it's fresh out of the gate, but it's one of the first studies that I've seen that does what I've attempted to do, and it shows pretty clearly in the data that voters genuinely do not like attack ads. And not only don't they like them, it changes their evaluation of the subjects of the ads. It changes their evaluations of the people who have put the ad out. And that, I think, is something that they really need to take into consideration. But it's clear that the Conservatives are coming out with all guns, to use the old expression, that they are coming both with positive and negative. This is a classic this is essentially a tailgate party for them. They've got this, our team's going to win, the other team sucks kind of attitude going right now. And I would be surprised if they don't just try and keep that up all the way through the campaign.
Okay, so learning that, Laura, the NDP are doing something different this time around. They're running attack ads on the Liberals. Why do you think they made that choice?
Well, I think that the NDP is aware that, they haven't been as successful in historically, I guess, in Ontario compared to the Liberals. And so they want to kind of build upon the fact that they have a stronger record right now. They've got, a more established team. And so they're trying to make sure that, people aren't seeing the Liberals as the other party. And I think this is a danger we run into in Canadian politics, well, at the federal level and also in Ontario politics, right? Because we end up thinking about, well, it's either the Liberals or it's the Conservatives. And so the NDP sometimes is the also ran, but I don't think that's the case right now. And they're trying to remind voters of that. And I think that's what they're spending their time doing. It's logical. It's unclear to what extent it will work. And the challenge here has to do with these kind of longstanding party loyalties that would come out with partisanship. There still are Liberal partisans in Ontario. And so they would be a larger group. If they were fully activated, then they would probably outnumber the NDP partisans. And so I think what's happening right now is the NDP is trying to convince some of those Liberals, listen, we're the group that can actually get it done, and you should be supporting us when we come through this. So it's not the same as doing kind of the anti-Ford rhetoric, which I think is implicit, I guess, in the way that they put forward, here's what we would do instead, right? But at the same time, they're thinking strategically, like, how can we actually make sure that we don't splinter the vote on the left and give a nice path to victory for the incumbent?
Now, Tim, Stephen Del Duca said he won't be running any attack ads. There was the earlier ad about resilience where he's talking about his late brother. Do you think his camp needs to change that position, and do you think it will as we head to the polls on June 2nd?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what he does. I'm a bit cynical on this, to be honest. They have already run an attack ad, and they did that last fall. I'm not sure it tested very well. They ran this very short piece that went out on mostly on social media. It was filmed in kind of the handset mode, attacking the Ford government about its position on handguns and trying to create up a bit of contrast on that issue. But it was very clearly in the attack mode. So the other thing about this that I find a bit disingenuous is that the Liberal strategy on the doorstep for many years now has been to come to the door saying basically what Laura has so eloquently laid out through all of this, that the split on the left is a problem, and we are the only party that can defeat the Ford government. And the message that tends to attend that doorstep pitch is the idea that if you don't vote for us, you will get 4 more years of this thing you don't want. And in anybody's books, that's an attack. So whether they're running ads about it or not, there is no question that negative messaging, attack messaging, is very clearly a part of their strategy and will continue to be. And so I think it's a bit disingenuous for them to say, well, we're not running broadcast ads about this. They're definitely taking both positions. They're running positive ads about their own leader and also pushing some negatives to try and, stimulate people into voting out of fear, essentially.
Now, Laura, of course, with less than a month to go before people head to the polls, what can Ontarians expect in terms of campaign strategies as we ramp up?
What can we expect? Well, I'd always like to think I know what's going to happen, and every campaign always is going to surprise me. So I really dislike making predictions on this. But at the same time, what I do think is that you're going to see the parties trying to define themselves really clearly. So, I mean, one of the things that Tim was saying, right, yes, definitely this, you'll get 4 years of the other guy if you don't vote for us. That is an attack. Sure, that is definitely a negative message. But at the same time, it's actually the job of the parties during campaigning to differentiate themselves from the alternatives. And this is really going to be an important element of what's happening. So on the one hand, they have to say, if you don't like Ford, then you got to choose us, is what they're going to be putting forward. But in order to say that, they need to say how they are different, from Ford, and in the Liberals' case, also from the NDP. And so this is going to entail a lot of distinctions, right? And they're going to be having to make those maybe fine-grained in some cases, clarifications about how are they different and better than the alternatives. Like, this is a really fine line for the Liberals to walk, and it's going to be interesting to see how well they do it. I mean, I think they've spent the majority of their time right now trying to introduce voters to the leader, to get an idea of who the team is and kind of, gain support that way. But when it comes down to it, people want to know what's going to happen after the votes are counted, right? When there's a new group in office, if there's a new group in office, and how will it be different for them? And so when it comes to voting NDP versus Liberal, that's going to be something that they have to work hard to distinguish, especially because they are, more the unknowns this time around.
Tim, we have less than a minute to go, and I want to get one last question in. Each of the four parties have their liabilities, whether you look at Doug Ford and sort of the pandemic restrictions, you look at the NDP and Andrea Horwath, this being her fourth attempt. When you look at Stephen Del Duca, is he really a big name? And then the Greens, how far can they really go? What would you say, or who would you say has the most difficult path to walk?
Well, I'd say it's Del Duca for sure, because he has a couple of disadvantages. He's operating from very, very, very small numbers of incumbent seats right now, and incumbency is always an advantage in elections. He also has the lack of recognition. That's not a huge handicap necessarily, but it's one you absolutely must overcome. Very few people know that he's the leader of the Liberal Party, and very few people would be able to identify him visibly. But there was a guy in 1995 who ran with only 11% recognition and ended up as premier of the province. So it does happen, but it's definitely the thing they need to do, and Del Duca has the biggest hill right now, in my view.
Tim, Laura, I want to thank you so much for your insights. I know we just got started, but it's going to be a very fun few weeks. So thank you so much for your time.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.